Thank you, Sarah. We are really excited to have Bailey Stock and Darin Preis with us here today, and I'm going to try to do a short bio on them. Bailey is the community organizer for Boone County with Central Missouri Community Action. She has a master's degree in history and political science, which means she can also run for office. Did you hear that, Bailey? Um, uh, she's passionate about addressing the systematic barriers of poverty and finding solutions to help better the living situation for underserved communities. And so with CMCA, she collaborates with a lot of community partners. Then Darin, it's hard to be short with Darin. His resume of activities goes from, which I really love, the what is that National Health Organization in Missouri. He was co-chair of that for a while. Missouri Foundation for Health. He was on our school board for years, and about 15 other organizations that make Columbia where we want to live. So I'll quickly say he's worked on early childhood and poverty issues since 1994. He led the Missouri Head Start State Collaboration Office for a number of years, 99 to 2005. And then since 2005, Mr. Preis has been the executive director of Central Missouri Community Action. He's served 3 terms, as I mentioned, on the Board of Education, as vice president and president. He's been on an executive leadership council for Boone County Cradle to Career Alliance. I mentioned already the National Foundation for Health. He's a really busy guy, and we are so happy to have him still working on this in Columbia. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you, Darin and Bailey, for being here today.
Thanks, Alice. I appreciate it. Gosh, I'm exhausted just listening to that. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I know many of you. It's been many years since I've been to a Muleskinners meeting, but I've run into many of you in various capacities through the years, and I appreciate your work and your support of democratic values and really just the interest that you have. I'm excited to talk to you about Central Missouri Community Action. That has been sort of the background of my life throughout all of these other activities that Alice was describing. But Central Missouri Community Action has really been a passion of mine to improve communities and move people out of poverty. I'm going to start by showing about a 14-minute video, if that's okay. I've got a little bit more time with this presentation than I normally do. So I'm going to show this a clip of a documentary about Sergeant Schreiber. He's the guy that was a relative of President Kennedy and really started the community action movement. And I just thought it would be fun to kind of show you some of this background before I then talk about what we're doing today and how it's evolved between. And then hopefully we have some time for questions and discussion as you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay, and we'll get this started. If you could, once it's about 30 seconds in, you'll start hearing the sound and some music. If you could just give me thumbs up that you can hear. I don't want to run into technical difficulties on this, so let me know. Hopefully you should see a screen now that says Sergeant Schreiber, an American Idealist. Okay, so far so good. I'm going to go ahead and hit play and enjoy. Are you hearing music now? Hold that thought.
No audio yet.
Hold that thought.
Dave, did we decide that we had this happen with the speaker a couple weeks back, Darin, and somehow when the person first hit share, there was a pop-up they had to click that said share audio. Wasn't that right, Dave?
It says make it, what's the
I
word?
could see an arrow down at the bottom that needs to be clicked on.
Oh, here we go. I see a share sound.
Yeah, share sound.
Start it back up and see.
In
Got it. Yep.
1964, 30
Perfect.
million Americans lived in poverty. Although most of the poor were white, the power of the civil rights movement raised the issue to a place on the national agenda and stirred the new president to action.
Can you help us free these Americans from the prison of poverty? And if you can, let me hear your voices.
As a young man, Johnson had taught Mexican-American children in rural Texas. Later, as a congressman, he idolized Franklin Roosevelt and dreamed of completing the New Deal. He named his vision for a better America, the Great Society. It included civil rights, voting rights, support for the arts, medical care to the elderly, and help for the poor. Lyndon Johnson was a master at moving legislation through Congress, but he had no blueprint for ending poverty. For that, he looked to Shriver.
If a general was asked, I want you to launch war on Grenada, could you invade it and take it over? Well, that's something you can get your mind around. But a war on poverty, that's like saying, could you, in Fronten's purpose, could you wage war on gravity? He thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this?
He began by ordering research, and then he went looking for what the author Michael Harrington called the other America, the invisible poor. In Appalachia, Shriver saw schools that were shacks and heard stories of children eating dirt from the inside of stovepipes. In the Deep South, he witnessed the rule of Jim Crow, whereby black children were kept out of school to pick cotton, while their parents faced violence if they attempted to vote. In the North, most blacks were confined to ghettos, cut off from good schools, housing, and jobs. When Shriver saw the research he ordered, he was stunned. Of all the nation's poor people, half were children.
He became very, very committed to the point where this was no longer just a political assignment or something he needed to do because the president asked him, but this was something that had to be done and done right. And he became very passionate about it.
People are interested in being treated as human beings. They're interested in having other people treat them, as the Declaration of Independence says, as equals. That's the first thing that's needed in the war against poverty.
The civil rights movement had really elevated the notion of equality, and he wants to extend that spirit now to programs to end poverty nationwide.
You have to have that sense of human respect and dignity and equality before these other specific programs, like a health program or an educational program, can have its maximum effect.
Mr. Shriver, you say that you hope that something...
Shriver called up anyone who knew anything about poverty. Activists, scholars, the priests and nuns who worked among the poor, and the reporters who wrote about them. In 16 weeks, they had a plan.
It's not a program of federal handouts to alleviate poverty temporarily. It is aid to help those who are willing to help themselves get out of poverty by building up their skills, increasing their employability.
Shriver hated the idea of handouts, which he equated with what he called cheap grace, a kind of a charity which does not empower people.
The plan created OEO, the Office of Economic Opportunity. As in the Peace Corps, he wanted the poor to lift themselves out of poverty, and he wanted privileged Americans to work among them. OEO launched VISTA, Head Start, Youth Corps, Job Corps, Upward Bound, Foster Grandparents, Work Study, and a way to give poor communities resources for their own anti-poverty programs called Community Action.
Community action, as its name implies, is local action. We depend completely on local communities to come to Washington with their own programs of combating poverty in the ways that they see fit to do it in their own hometown.
Everybody's talking about our country's problems. Why not do something about them? The name of the game is VISTA. Volunteers in service.
Shriver returned to the college campuses. and urged students and teachers to practice what he called the politics of service.
Not by more courses and responsibility, not by lectures, not by commencement speeches, but by political action in this true sense of politics, in the service of your city.
It mobilizes a tremendous cohort, particularly of young Americans, who are now being challenged in a way in which they felt they had not been challenged before.
It was a time in history when it was clear that it's the right thing to do and you could do it. Just do it. Everybody get involved and do what you can do.
Within a year, OEO announced that the war on poverty had reached 3 million people. Newsweek wrote, "The poor were no longer invisible."
As of today, 1,000 American communities have organized themselves into community action groups.
The newly formed groups met in churches and community centers, making plans to improve life in their city neighborhoods and small towns.
The water should be on.
It was the first time poor communities had authority and federal money to tackle problems where they lived.
I think that this is a problem that this group should be actively involved in.
They use the influx of federal money to tackle problems like transportation, like child development, like education, like healthcare, like slum conditions.
Shriver reasoned that for the poor to have some control over decisions affecting their lives, OEO needed to fund community action groups independent of City Hall, even though he knew that would anger local politicians. And it did.
And they said, what the hell is Shriver doing? Big city mayors were outraged by community action, and they argued, we're the duly elected representatives of the people.
In Newark, Los Angeles, Cleveland, Chicago, action groups carried out rent strikes against slum landlords and protested government policies that maintained segregation. They charged mayors with neglecting their schools and city services and accused them of favoring more affluent communities. Inside the war on poverty, battles erupted in communities across the country in a struggle for power.
From the perspective of the activists themselves, it's a stepping stone for them to get their issues heard and to finally get the city to pay attention and do something about their problems. And sometimes that means they're on a collision course with big city mayors. And so for the mayors, it looks like the federal money is helping these rabble-rousers make trouble.
All they had to do was pick up a telephone, dial a number, and say, "We are still working on it."
Shriver met with the nation's mayors to try to ease tensions. "We're not trying to exclude mayors," he said, "but we want to bring everyone in."
Let's all of us have enough of the spirit of our country and enough compassion to unbar the door to all who are poor.
But few mayors were moved.
And by joining
In his
together,
defense, Shriver told Congress that the war on poverty was not just to help poor people change, but that hostile or uncaring institutions also had to change, especially government. A year into the war on poverty, Shriver found another way to make that happen.
When he found himself politically blocked, what more natural thing would there be but to turn to the law and to see if the law could be made an ally to the poor?
the poor need and deserve the same quality of legal services that the profession owes to all citizens.
He makes an incredible speech, and he pulls the ABA into the community action program through legal services to the poor.
In January of 1966, Shriver opened neighborhood law offices across the country.
We will be representing the poor people. We will continue to accept cases. And
along comes this little pipsqueak lawyer program that says if you keep doing things the way you have been doing, like discriminating against folks who are black or folks who are Hispanic or kids who have arrest records as juveniles, we're just going to have to sue you.
They sued school boards and city governments for discrimination and employers for unfair labor practices.
He had Ronald Reagan, amongst other folks, call him up and say, hey, what are your lawyers out in California doing this? They're suing the Department of Labor. That's me. You're giving them money to sue me. What's going on here?
They were talking about inequality. And all of a sudden, these state commissioners get dragged into a courtroom, the superintendent of schools, the mayor.
Leaders of both parties complained that legal services and community action were a bunch of Boston Tea Parties. And they were dumbfounded. Shriver dared to give federal money to the poor to sue local governments.
He bought into a mess of trouble and stood by it. He was putting his personal capital on the line for this. All the credibility that he had bought with the Peace Corps, all of the credibility of a Kennedy family connection, and his own reputation as somebody from the private sector who'd been successful.
We expect action at the community level. And when you've got action, you've got arguments, you've got dissent, you've got differences of opinion. That's what we're financing. For the first time in the history of this country, poor people actually have a place and a way in which to express themselves. That's community action. Anybody thinks that isn't action misplaces or misinterprets the situation. They think community action must mean community apathy or community torpor or community death. We're creating life at the community level. When you got life, you got movement, you got dissension, you got action. That's what we want.
Shriver pushed and pleaded with local officials to move over and share power with those who are to be helped. But it can't be token involvement, he said. It must be real.
That question of whether or not the solution to the problems of the country and society involve a partnership of all people or simply involve the workings of those people who are already established leaders, that's the central controversy. And I think that how so many people come on the other side of the issue than Shriver does tells us that for many people, the question was not solving poverty, but maintaining power.
I'm going to stop it right there. So obviously there is a lot to unpack with that. I'm not going to try to do that. Oh, hang on, it's trying to start again. I'm not going to try to unpack all of that because there's a whole lot there, but I can say, you know, I've probably seen that clip 20 times or so, and every time I get inspired anew and think about the leadership we had in our country at that point that really kind of led us to where we are today. I mean, they established that it's okay for community members to speak out and play a role in public governance. Obviously, we still struggle with some of those things, but they established the foundation and the expectation that we should speak up and speak out and be involved in public discourse. You know, my only regret is that they used a war metaphor for the war on poverty, when in fact, you know, if you take that metaphor on, you know, it's the tools and the machinations of war that's part of the problem. It's, you know, we really see that poverty is a bit more of a river, and we can help individuals and we can change local community policy, but obviously we still have tremendous challenges at the national level in terms of the leadership that we have today. And you know, poverty looks very different today. You know, people can afford stuff just because of the way our commercial industries and the markets work, but people still can't establish assets, and it's still very challenging to get higher education and all of the things that segregate the poor from the wealthy and the Black from the white, and the gay from the straight, and all of the other differences that we see in our society. I hear myself getting onto my soapbox. I'm going to be careful not to do that, but I am going to switch over now to my presentation, if that's okay. And hopefully you should now see a screen that says Central Missouri Community Action. Fantastic. And hopefully you see it now in a larger screen. You'll note at the bottom that our mission is to build relationships to empower people, strengthen resilience, and improve quality of life for all members of the community. you'll hear reflections of that, the founding fathers of our movement in that mission, starting with relationships. You know, we're not just a social service agency that's just providing individual services. It's about relationships and connections across the board with funders, with local politicians, with the people that we serve, all of the organizations that we work with. And then empowerment is an interesting word, but it's important to us because we think that you actually can empower people by giving them voices and by showing them the tools that are available to them to reach whatever goals they have for themselves. And then strengthening resilience, I consider resilience to be the measurable proxy for hope. When you can bounce back from difficult times, that's when resilience really matters. And that's the tool that we're trying to give those we serve. And then improving quality of life for all members of the community. Sergeant Shriver tells us that, when communities have poverty in them, then we are not reaching our full potential. And so when we talk about improving quality of life for all members of the community, that means because we're trying to eliminate poverty, period. That's a tall order, obviously, but I'll tell you a little bit about how we're trying to achieve that. So first off, we're a fairly large organization. So we cover 11 counties. 8 of them are considered our core. I did want to mention, so you heard them talking on that video about the Office of Economic Opportunity. That was there until the early 80s when President Reagan decided that he wanted smaller government. And it was terribly ironic because all he really did was change federal funding to state block grants. And then those state block grants created additional layers of administration in 50 states. So in my mind, it actually, amplified the size of government rather than reducing it. He had several theories that I would probably argue with, and probably most of you would as well. But so today we have a community services block grant. That's the core funding that makes us a community action agency. It defines the way our board is structured. It defines organizational standards that we apply. And again, that's what makes us a community action agency. So again, this is the service area that we have. We've got about 220 employees. We should have an additional 30, but we're struggling with some employment. I'll tell you about a little bit in a little bit. I mentioned that poverty looks a lot different than it did in the 60s, but it's still with us. And it's remained relatively static. And my theory on that is because, again, it's not a pond that we're trying to drain, it's a river. And so we keep trying to look upstream and figure out where the poverty is coming in. At the same time, we're pulling people out of poverty. We're giving them the tools they need to be successful and self-sufficient. But you can see here, we still have a tremendous, horrible number of people living in poverty. These numbers dipped dramatically during COVID, because we were providing, tremendous resources for folks who were, we were all trying to get through the pandemic. But it showed us that it is possible to eliminate poverty. We just have to make some decisions at the national policy and budgetary level to do that. I don't think that there's the will to make that happen right now. So we are working at the local level to deal with the effects of, that lack of action. So this is our core service area. And again, you can see that these poverty levels have remained pretty static. I mean, the poverty rate in 1965 was pretty darn close to this. And it's because people are still getting thrown into that river and struggling to build assets that would permanently pull them out of poverty. That's sort of our ongoing struggle. I won't dwell on it too much because unless I could get employers to pay a lot more, unless I could change banking regulations so that the poor people weren't penalized for the fact that they don't have money, if I could eliminate predatory lending practices, if I could increase the quality of housing that landlords provide, all of those are the big picture things that we are chipping away at. But ultimately, we're still dealing with the effects of the fact that those policies haven't changed and working to support those who are struggling. You have probably seen all of these statistics. Boone County has been working on a project, Upward Mobility, and Bailey's going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But we know that the Department of Housing and Urban Development defines housing poor as spending more than 35% of your household income on housing cost. So you see that second statistic, 43.5% of renters are paying more than a third of their monthly income on housing. Just, imagine that if you're, making $30,000 and 10,000 of that is going, or, more than 35% is going to housing costs, that just doesn't leave you much for all of the other costs and food and transportation, healthcare, all of those things. It really makes it a difficult dynamic when you've got that many people who are paying that high of a percentage just on housing costs alone. The unemployment rate is one I just can't get my head around. Many people are working. The unemployment rate in Boone County has traditionally been very low. And clearly people aren't earning enough wages to meet their basic needs. So those living wages just still aren't in place, even though people are working and doing all of the things that we as a society tell them they need to do to be successful. They're doing those things and still they need assistance. So, that again speaks to the bigger picture that's out there. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to try to impact the causes and conditions of poverty. And it starts with this theory of change. We spent a lot of time a few years ago really thinking about what is it in terms of our services that we're trying to do to affect the individuals we serve. And we came up with this theory. It's not earth-shattering, it's not new. But ultimately, we know that people need social connections, family well-being, and economic stability to be successful and to thrive in our society. And that's regardless of income. I don't want to just say this is what poor people need. This is all of us. So you look at social connections, that includes leadership development, relationship skills, and civic engagement and community involvement. All of you, just by your sheer presence in this, in the Muleskinners, you represent that social connections category very well. Those are the things that we need to do to build relationships and to advocate for ourselves and for our families. And then family well-being, that encompasses health and wellness, cognitive development, and parenting skills. We all have to be lifelong learners, and we have to promote that through our services. And that's where that comes in. And then finally, economic stability. Some people say it's all about money, but those first two wheels, in our opinion, are critically important to ongoing success. But obviously, you need economic stability to do those other things. And so that means having a job that pays living wages. It means having quality housing that you can afford. It means having the education that you need to have that living wage job, whatever that might be. And then ultimately, you need to be able to build assets so that you have something to fall back on when times are hard. So again, all of those social connections, family well-being, and economic stability build towards what we think is social mobility and thriving communities. And all of those things have to work together. So there's a lot of organizations that have, single points of entry or single services, but we have to acknowledge that it's all of these things together that move people towards social mobility. So this slide is a little busy, I apologize, but if you'll follow along, you see the legend down at the bottom. The three different icons represent those three different wheels: the social connections, economic stability, and family well-being. And then we've categorized all of our programs and services in terms of how those services line up with our theory of change. So we don't ever suggest that, come to CMCA and we'll solve all of your problems. There are many, many things. We still have to make lots of referrals. We still have to work with many partners to get them wherever they want to be. But I'm going to start here on the lower right with family coaching. We have shifted to something we call the whole family approach, or you might have heard people refer to it as 2-generation approaches to family work and case management. This really means that we're looking at entire households. So we're not looking at just one person and what they need to do, but looking at the whole household and thinking through, what do you want for your family? What do you want out of your life? We use something called a self-sufficiency matrix that has 25 different variables that we measure with them, with our members, to determine whether they're in crisis or thriving. So we look at their housing situation, their education, their income, their food stability, you name it. There's 25 different variables. And then based on sort of the assessment that we do with them, they establish their own goals. We're not telling anybody what they have to do to have the quality of life that they want. We want them to set their goals, and then we'll help them to reach those goals. And so that's where the family coaching comes in. We have family success coaches that, it's not about checking boxes and making lists. It's really about coaching them. Just, you can think about it in like sports. How do you get better at swinging this bat and hitting the ball and changing the trajectory and really getting what you want? That coaching is, we use motivational interviewing, which is a way of really, we're not trying to lead them towards anything, but we want them to pull out the information that we need to support them. I'll go quickly through these programs so then we can get into some Q&A and discussion. Skill Up is an employment and training program for people that receive temporary assistance for needy families. Show Me Healthy Relationships. This falls into that social connections category, and it's really about supporting people's communication skills, their relationship building, how to conflict resolution, and really thinking about the type of relationships like adults mentoring their young children. Resource coordination. This sort of acknowledges that you have to have some level of stability to think about longer term goals and your ultimate economic self-sufficiency. So our coaches work to basically connect people to those basic resources that they need to be successful. The Missouri Women's Business Center we started just a few years ago. This is one of the things I love about community action, is that we respond to the needs in our communities. So either looking for greater forms of efficiency or minimizing gaps, whatever it might be. In Central Missouri, there are a lot of nonprofits providing a lot of support and services, but we wanted to get more into the economic development part of that. And so we started the Missouri Women's Business Center to work with poor and minority women to take those hobbies that they might have and start to monetize them and start bringing in income. We've seen a tremendous amount of success with that. We've seen just this past year 35 new businesses start up, and you can amplify that by the 6 years that we've been operating and see that has been a very successful initiative. Housing development. We've got several apartment complexes that we own and manage, and basically, subsidize the rent on those so that people can afford to live there. We've got several projects in the works right now. In Columbia, we're working on a project that we call Providence Landing. We bought 7 lots on Providence Road, just south of Kilgore, so if you can kind of picture that area. And the plan is to build 14 single-family attached homes that we will sell as condos. So we'll maintain ownership of the property, just like a land trust, so that we can reduce the cost to the home buyer by the value of the land. So we actually are waiting for the city council to hopefully, fingers crossed, approve an ARPA application that we put in that will help to fund that. And then boy, I'll tell you, construction is really expensive these days. So, these are about 1,100 square foot homes, and it's going to cost us a little over $200,000 to build each one of those units. That's not affordable for people to buy. So we are going to be heavily subsidizing that, and our target sale price is going to be between $135,000 and $150,000 for the sale, and we'll provide down payment assistance to those buyers so that they'll be eligible for the loans they'll need. So that's one project. I'd be happy to answer any questions about that. We're also working on 40 apartment units in Jefferson City and another 40 apartment units in Mexico, Missouri. And then we own a 16-unit apartment complex up in Centralia that we're doing a total gut rehab on it, replacing the roof, the siding, the floors, the kitchen. We're putting in appliances, including washer and dryer. We're replacing the cabinets and the bathrooms and basically the whole deal. The key here is that we believe that quality housing is important. It's not just about putting a roof over somebody's head, but they deserve the opportunity to live in a place they can be proud of and it's high quality. I could go on and on about that because I've been working a lot on the housing development side the last year, really, but I'll stop there. The Housing Choice Voucher Program, this is, you probably recognize it as the Section 8 program. The idea here is that basically we have a three-way agreement between tenants, landlords, and Central Missouri Community Action. So we work with the tenants to make sure that they are maintaining the properties and paying their portion of the rent in order to get a subsidy. So we pay a portion of their rent based on their income and their family size and a couple of other variables. But that's a really effective way of helping people to afford their housing. The Financial Opportunity Center is also something that we started just in the last few years, again, based on the needs in the community. We do a community assessment every 3 years and adjust our programs and services based on that. So the Financial Opportunity Center, we work with financial coaches, and it's basically a three-pronged approach. First, again, we do resource coordination so that we can stabilize just whatever crisis is going on in their household. And then we work on employment opportunities to either make sure they have a job or that they increase their wages so that they're living wage. And then last, we work with them on budgeting, financial planning, retirement, kind of bigger picture, longer term planning. Child development, so Head Start is actually our largest program. So we serve 11 counties with this program. We serve almost 600 families. And this is a comprehensive early childhood education program. We're working with the children on developmentally appropriate practices. And then we also work very closely with their parents to make sure that they're going home to safe, stable environments and that the parents have the capacity really to support their child's ongoing education. Head Start is for 3 to 5 year olds. Early Head Start is for infants and toddlers and pregnant women. And then the Bridge is something that we devised ourselves to continue working with those families as they move into kindergarten through 5th grade. So we're working with Columbia Public Schools and school districts in Cooper County and Howard County we go on home visits with the teachers. We go with the parents on parent-teacher visits. And then we have lots of opportunities in between where we're working on specific skills. We have group workshops, but really helping to build that relationship between the parents and the teachers that they work with. Foster Grandparents is a program we work with low-income seniors. And basically we pay them a stipend to work in schools and Head Start centers and provide an extra set of hands and hugs for those classrooms. It's a great way of really supporting seniors and to keep them connected to young people in their lives. Energy assistance, unfortunately, this is probably one of the things people best know us for. This is it is the lowest touch form of support that we provide, but it is critically important for many, many, many families who struggle to pay their utility bills. So LIHEAP is the energy program, LIWAP is the water assistance program, and then weatherization is the program where we can actually go into homes. We do a pressure test where we seal off the front door, blow air into the home, and then measure the pressure to see where the air is leaking. And then we go in and we replace windows, we put in lots of insulation, generally improve the property so that it's more energy efficient on the front end so their utility bills go down. And then I'm going to have a sip of water and let Bailey talk a little bit about some of the work that our community organizers do. Bailey is our Boone County community organizer, and she is just a bundle of energy and life and joy for Central Missouri Community Action. Bailey, I'll turn it over to you to talk about what community organizers do.
Thank you so much, Darin. Yes, get the drink of water. You deserve it. So yes, I'm the community organizer for Boone County. I actually just started in May, so I'm still relatively new to the position. But so far, over the past few months, I have really dove right into the program and am really trying to address poverty at the community level. So with that, my responsibilities are pretty much, like I said, addressing poverty at the community level. So there are 3 ways that I do that specifically that are through CMCA. So we do have opportunities for poverty simulations. So that's where participants from, we partner with workplaces such as local schools, with the local health department, other departments through the city or county, and really anyone else who has the capacity to do this. But we have them experience 4 15-minute weeks, so an entire month, quote unquote, of poverty. And so this is where they have to, they are assigned a family, so they have to take on a role and role play as that specific member of the family. They go to work, they find childcare, they pay rent and utilities. They have to figure out how to live life on a low income. And then they also have to learn the stress that comes with living a life with low income. So that is one of the ways that we try to address poverty at the community level, and help those who may not be completely aware of the effects of poverty, but may work with a lot of members of the community who are experiencing poverty, to help them understand what those realities are. Similarly, we have reels, which are reality education and life lessons simulations. And these are sort of like a poverty simulation, but it is specifically geared towards high school students. And so in this, they do the poverty simulation, but they do it both through a proactive, which would be a life where they, made really good decisions. They graduated high school. They may have gotten a job after high school. They take on those roles and then go through the weeks of the 15-minute weeks of poverty, and are able to experience a life that where it may not be as difficult as the reactive life. The reactive life is someone who didn't make good decisions. Maybe they didn't graduate, they're unemployed, they have a really low income household. So they go through that experience. And then during a debrief, they discuss and they're encouraged to point out, the differences between the 2 lifestyles. And the intent is to hopefully improve graduation rates and attendance rates in local schools. Step up to leadership, going back to Sergeant Shriver's mission of, helping people in poverty advocate for themselves and their community. We teach a 12-week course. They get a workbook right here on leadership development, specifically for low-income adults. So they teach best practices for serving on school boards, board of directors, and just engaging in community work. So they learn things such as conflict management, funding, creating an agenda for meetings, and just the overall teamwork of building and trying to help the community overcome any sort of situation or something like that. So, but that it goes entirely with our mission with the Community Services Block Grant. Our agency has a tripartite board, which means that a third of our board of directors has to be low income. And so Step Up to Leadership is a great way for those to, learn those leadership development skills and kind of make their way into our board of directors or other board of directors in the community. And then lastly, we also teach a 10-week program, which I say teach very lightly because it's mainly group activities and discussions. This one's a little bit more of collaboration with people who are experiencing poverty. So through discussions, they talk about the causes of poverty, the resources to improve their situations, and strategies just for moving out of poverty. So once again, going along with Sergeant Shriver's mission of helping those in poverty advocate for themselves and potentially move out of those situations. So outside of those key areas that I do for specifically for CMCA, my community organizing piece is also going out in the community and working with local initiatives and other agencies to partner and collaborate on addressing poverty. And it may not be specifically like this is a group for addressing poverty, but it is an issue that is attached to poverty. So something like housing or jobs and workforce development, transportation, all of those things are key components to those experiencing poverty. And how do we fix those issues, or at least eliminate the barriers that people have in those areas. So Darin did mention that we have in Boone County a framework called Upward Mobility. That's through the Boone County Community Services Department. And they go through, and we have 3 different cohorts that meet. One is specifically for early grade literacy, another one is jobs and workforce development, and another one is fair and inclusive housing. And those were all determined as needs through a community needs assessment with members of the community as well as agencies in the area as well. So we meet and we just address ways to eliminate those barriers and improve those situations and statistics in Boone County specifically. Another area that I'm working on with the Source Summit out of Jeff City is a transportation work group that is for helping individuals who are having issues with getting to work. They're offering a free van service specifically for employees that employers will pay to have their employees be able to get to work on time. So for those who either have are having car issues or don't have a car at all, or for those who may not live towards the nearest bus stop, that those are all eligible people for this specific first last mile initiative is what they're calling it. Our pilot group right now is helping employees get to work over on the Route B corridor off of Paris Road because there is no bus route up there. So we're getting people to work out there in the industrial area. And then lastly, we have started a new initiative through Unity in the Community. This is specifically in Columbia, and it's looking to grow into other towns in Boone County as well. But part of the initiative, we discussed doing resource fairs in areas in specific neighborhoods that have been historically underserved or segregated, and bring resources to them. So we eliminate that transportation barrier. We are building trust within those communities. And we're just able to, talk one-on-one to someone who lives on that street, and we're able to get them the services they need right away. We have one coming up in a couple weeks off of Demerit over east of town. So, but yeah, those are all the projects that I'm currently working on, and of course, more come our way every week. So, but yeah, it's amazing seeing the community really come together and help us in our work, because CMCA can't do it all on our own. We certainly try, but we do need those partnering agencies to help us in this initiative as well.
Well done, Bailey. I appreciate you jumping in. I'm going to zip through these last couple of slides just because there's some questions in the chat that I want to make sure that I get to. So this is just a snippet of the information that we share with our board of directors every month. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. I do want to point out that when you see, so each of these are based on the goals that our members set. So when you see 19 adults and youth placed in jobs, that's 19 of those who have set finding a job as a goal. So that's one caveat. And the second caveat is these seem like low numbers, but it takes a tremendous amount of time and energy to make these types of life-changing differences in the lives of those we serve. So I'm just going to kind of flip through some of these results. You see the utility assistance, 6,600 applications that we processed for utility assistance. There are a lot of people who need that service. Weatherization, we put in about $7,600 per home on average to make improvements that make their homes more energy efficient. The housing choice voucher, it has a long wait list. There's 133 people on our wait list. That's about a 6 to 8 month wait. So this is not a program that's for people who are in crisis today or homeless. It's really about people that need, subsidy for their housing costs. It's interesting, during COVID, we saw a pretty scary increase in behavior issues in young children in Head Start. That's starting to stabilize a little bit. These numbers are lower than they have been the last couple of years. That's a really good sign. It's really about consistency and routine and providing support for young children that they weren't getting when during the pandemic. You see here we have 32 active Head Start staff vacancies. I'm not sure what happened to all of the early childhood teachers, but we are struggling like crazy to find them. If you know anybody that has any interest in a career in early childhood education, please send them to our website, cmca.us, and you can look at the careers tab and you'll see a listing of all of the open positions that we currently have. Health is a critical, important part of moving people towards stability. If they're not healthy, then they can't be consistent in their jobs, and there's pretty extreme costs associated with that. So we connect people with medical homes so that, and we make sure that they're signed up for Medicaid or Medicare, depending on their circumstance. And then work with them. Really, it's all about prevention. That's how you get cost savings, and that's how you get lifelong health and wellness. So we focus on those issues. So all of those things combined really fall into, this is just a sample of the kind of success that we see. So someone comes to us because they need utility assistance, and we recognize that they need more than that. So this, Tanya was living in transitional housing. She actually didn't realize that she was eligible for food stamps because she had a record and thought that that made her ineligible. So through our financial coaches, we helped her understand what other kind of resources might be available to her. She had a young child at the time, so we enrolled the child in Head Start so that she would have that stability during the day. She could get a job. And today she's working at a gas station, a convenience store. I think she's making $15 an hour, which is pretty close to living wage. So that's a huge improvement. She's in affordable housing. She has the opportunity for social connections because there's stability in her life. And most important, she really is taking ownership for where she wants to go in life. This is a pretty common kind of story that we see all the time, and it really takes all the pieces and parts of our programs and services and turns it into life changes. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention that we accept donations, and that is a big part of our funding to help us fill the gaps. I saw one of the questions in the chat, where do we get our funding? And I'll go ahead and stop sharing because someone also wanted to see my face for some reason. So most of our funding is federal in nature. Most of it then passes through the state Department of Social Services or the Department of Health and Senior Services. Head Start is the only program that remains federal to local. So our Head Start funds come directly from the Office of Head Start in the Administration for Children and Families. So that federal funding is probably about 70% of our overall funding. We also receive, we have United Way funds. There are 4 United Way entities in our footprint. 3 of them help fund us. We get funds from counties, we get funds from cities, we get philanthropic dollars like from the Missouri Foundation for Health, the AP Green Foundation, and then of course the last forefront is local donors. So people that write us checks for $25. All of that is packaged together and helps us to make a difference in people's lives. So I'm going to hit these questions and see if we can't get everything. Alice, I'm super jealous that you got to meet Sergeant Shriver. the poverty rate in Columbia is not high because of resources. That is a myth that is not true. People who are in crisis or struggling aren't looking at the city directory to see where they can go to get services. They're stuck. And so there's probably a variety of reasons that, college students factors into this. But it's because people aren't making enough money to pay their bills in Columbia. That's partly because the cost of living is slightly higher than some of our rural areas. It's some of our large employers still aren't paying living wages. And I'll tell you, every time you see Walmart paying $10 or $12 now, it's minimum wage. Walmart is being subsidized by federal programs because we come in behind them and help their workers pay their rent. So let that ponder in your head for a second. Let's see, Kathy, we actually are serving only about 5% of eligible families with our Head Start program. Costs have gone up over the last 50 years, and our enrollment, we actually had to reduce our enrollment a little bit so that we could afford the comprehensive nature of that program. Let's see, I just talked about where funding comes from. I just stopped screen sharing so you can see my ugly face. Someone asked Bailey about who participates in poverty simulations. It is church groups, it is service clubs. The most recent one we did in Columbia was actually for the health department and the school nurses with Columbia Public Schools. So we do it for a variety of groups and basically anybody that's interested. Usually we want to have a group of about 80 so that it fills out the room, and that's kind of what the simulation's based on. Volunteer needs and opportunities. So one thing I always do like to say is that the work that we do requires paid professionals. So our coaches are all paid positions. We don't use volunteers for that direct service to our members. However, we love it when people come into our Head Start centers and read to the kids or help with various activities. We also need help with these poverty simulations. So, crowd control, managing the different stations that are associated with that. If you're interested in volunteer opportunities, you can let me or Bailey know, and we'll see if we can find a good place for you. Let's see, does CMCA lobby in Jefferson City on these issues? Sort of. We are not allowed to lobby directly because of the nature of our funding. So we do advocate. There's a key distinction there. So we help our legislators understand the realities of poverty and the circumstances that people are living in. But we have a state association called the Missouri Community Action Network that has a lobbyist working for us to directly lobby on those issues. And then we come in and testify on various things, really, again, about helping people understand the realities that folks are experiencing. We also have, I love the next question. We also have a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., who is really focusing on our funding. Just the nature of our network requires a lot of federal funding. That is a Beatles photo behind me. It's my clock, and there's a Star Wars poster below it. I can't help but be me at every opportunity. It is not signed, unfortunately. I don't have that kind of weight. Average Section 8 rent. So we go in and look at the market rent. So landlords can charge up to 120% of market rent. And then again, we pay a portion of that based on the income of the tenant. So we see, rents between $700 and $1,000. Typically for a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment or house. And then again, depending on the income and the family size of the tenant, we might pay half of that, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but that kind of gives you the general sense of it. I think I caught all of the questions, but I see that Sue and Herb have their hand up.
Sue and I appreciate and are avid supporters of this program from the early 1960s. Thank you too for working in it, and you for a long time. question, two-part question. What is the present percentage or percentile of the public, families or individuals within your area and in Boone County eligible for your services? And how are your services distributed among them with respect to income, evenly, progressively more for the poor, or retrogressively more for the less well poor?
Oh, goodness, that's a lot. I knew that you were going to nail me on something.
Wasn't meant to nail you.
Well, so all of those questions are the answers to those questions are very nuanced. So you saw that about 17% of the population in Boone County is poor. So that's according to the federal poverty level. So that's based on a schedule established by the U.S. Department of Agriculture back in the 1950s, and it's based purely on the cost of food. So, for example, Head Start families, the eligibility criteria is 100% of poverty. So everybody that falls under the poverty level is eligible to enroll in Head Start. Other programs like our utility assistance program, it's based on the state median income. So it's 60% of the state median income. State median income is around $55,000 or so. So for a family of four, so to be eligible, you have to make about $32,000 or $33,000 or below for that family of four. In terms of whether we're providing services regressively or progressively, it's really based on first come, first serve. So these are not entitlement programs. We don't serve everybody that's eligible for them. It's about getting the word out to those we serve or those who are eligible for the services. I will tell you that about 44% of those we serve are minorities, which is far higher than the percentage of the minorities to our general population. So I think that's a good thing because we are really reaching out into our minority populations to make sure that they are aware of our programs and have access to the services. But we are serving a minuscule portion of those who are eligible. I mentioned, less than 5% for Head Start. For utility assistance is probably the highest level, but it's probably only 25 or 30% of people who are eligible for that assistance are getting it. And then the other services, well, like housing assistance, oh my gosh, I mean, it may be 1% of those who need it. It's very low. And a follow-up question, go ahead.
I think you're muted, Sue.
One of the things that I had forgotten.
You got muted again accidentally.
Remuted again.
Okay, I'm sorry. One of the things that I had forgotten was that Sergeant Shriver was stressing not giving handouts. But all my relatives are Canadians, all my cousins and all. And during the pandemic, part of the reason things got better was because of some of the uniform funds that went out to a number of people, or at least emphasizing some of the people that didn't have so much funds. The Canadians have so many of those safety nets. They also even have things built in, I think, that possibly that stresses that people can't get real high, the CEOs can't get real high income and all that thing. I think at this point, it's gotten to the point that we need to do the combination. I'm just trying to point that out because if we had universal health, that would really help. It would probably reduce the number in poverty pretty significantly. If we had a individual child payment to each family each month, that would make a big difference. And I think our society would be helped by having a year of maternity leave like they do, and that's maternity, paternity, and either can share it.
Yeah, Sue, that's a fantastic point. I agree 100%. I think people have this idea that poor people are not accountable or responsible for their own issues. So that when we talk about handouts, I think it's that public benefits don't come without a cost or without, we all have responsibilities for our own tax dollars and for what we do in our lives. But I think I would love, like you said, to elevate the conversation, like we should be providing basic human rights. People should have health care. People should have housing. People should be fed. That shouldn't even be part of the conversation. Those things should be the starting point. And then we can talk about how do you want to get to the next level? How do you want to, leave a legacy for your family or have assets that you can build on from generation to generation? I totally agree with you. That's, that's where, I don't know. I would love to get into politics and try to take some of those things on, but the discourse is not in the right place right now. Let's see. So Al asked about where I can find more information about the housing plan for Providence. So if you'd like, I can follow up and send you some more information, Al. He asked, why aren't we just building more housing like currently exists? And we actually kind of are. We design these homes to match the aesthetic of the neighborhoods that surround it. So they are, like I said, they're single family attached houses. So they basically are duplexes, but they've been designed with front porches and, they look like they're going to fit into the neighborhood. Right, so did I answer your question, Al?
Yeah, thanks, Darin. It was actually Mary Jo's question.
Good to see both of you, by the way.
Thank you.
Did I answer the question or is there more to that?
That'll do. Thank you.
Great. Any last questions simmering out there? Oh, sorry, Pam, I see your hand. Go for it.
It's not a question. I just want to thank CMCA because 10 years ago, I got a ground source heat pump and extra insulation in my attic from CMCA, and I'll be forever grateful.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that we had a pilot project there for just a little while where we were able to put in ground source heat pumps. I'm glad to know that it went to good use.
Mm-hmm. It certainly did.
Wonderful.
Great. Okay, well, I think with that, we'll thank our speakers for being here. Thank you so much for that overview and discussion of all the good work you do in our community. We appreciate you. We will move on now to the announcements. You two are welcome to hang out. You don't have to leave, but we realize that